and welcome to the Academy of Imperfection, a conversational lecture series where experts in their field share their wisdom on the subject of imperfection. Today, we speak with habitual best-selling author Jame Clear, all about your atomic habits.
I've come up with what I call the 4 laws of behavior change. Make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, make it satisfying. And just those 4 questions alone will increase the odds that whatever that habit is that you're thinking about is going to occur. So make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, make it satisfying.
So put down your crown jewels and join students Hugh, Ryan, and Josh with Jame Clear in the Academy of Imperfection.
Well, this is a monumentous Academy of Imperfection. It really, really is. Like sometimes we get, every Academy guest, every lecturer we have on in the Academy is special, of course. But today's lecturer, Jame Clear, is a very, very, very top-selling author, if that's an official term. And we've had top-selling authors, they come and go. But a very top-selling author?
I think he's the toppest-selling author.
He's the toppest-selling author?
We've had, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Jame Clear is the author of Atomic Habits, which has sold 15 million copies worldwide. It's been translated into 50 languages.
Whoa.
And it is just so exciting to have you with us, James. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, thank you so much. Yeah, pleasure to talk to you guys.
Oh, your book, Atomic Habits, I feel like anyone who would choose to listen to this episode, particularly obviously, but anyone who listens to this podcast has some sort of interest in probably bettering themselves in some way, in which case they're probably reading books around the subject. If you haven't read Atomic Habits, no doubt it's been suggested to you on your whatever app you use or reading platform. It's been suggested to you for years, and for whatever reason you've resisted. Well, that resistance stops today after you listen to James talk.
So we will get into James's story in a second because I do find it really compelling as to why he has become such an expert in the area of habits and habit formation. I think it's really fascinating also just our journeys with habits. I think, Ryan, you're so, especially in the last few years, just so interested and so fascinated by and so good at forming good habits. Josh and I think you were saying before, Josh, you sort of feel like we're maybe at the opposite end of the habit spectrum.
And maybe this is something we can get into because I love how in your book you explore the internal and external factors that allow you to be able to embed habits, because Hugh and I as brothers are very similar, but I really feel like Hugh's been able to better himself by these incremental gains that you will talk about, whereas I can only think of bad habits I've got. And I've got this sort of negative association with habits that I'm trying to change, but I feel like it's only now at about 36 that I feel like I can start chipping away at it, which I wish I'd been able to get onto it earlier. So anyway, we should probably let you talk.
Yeah. Welcome.
Yeah, that's great. No, I'm excited to talk to you guys about it. And, there are many different ways to think about habits, and there are many strategies to use or techniques to apply. And I don't think that there is one best way to do it, but I'm happy to share the best way that I know and the best strategies that I've come across. And that was sort of one of the driving forces behind Atomic Habits was, can I compile all of this stuff that I've come across, either through research or personal experience, into something that is practical and actionable? And to a large degree, whatever I share in the book and we'll talk about in this conversation, for the most part, I'm not really saying anything that has never been said before. But my hope is that I can share it in a way where you think, I hadn't quite thought about it that way before, or maybe that gives you a different line of attack, or, I hadn't quite put it like that, but I've seen that in my own life. And to me, that's when there's some resonance there between what I say and common sense and what you've seen in your own life. And you think, yeah, I think something like that could work for me. That's kind of what I feel like is the ultimate proof of an idea is it practical enough? Is it actionable enough to work in real life? Of course, I want it to be grounded in science, but we don't live in the lab. We live in real life. And so ultimately what I want is to take the best things that science has kind of found and that probably many thousands of years of personal history and wisdom and, common knowledge has found, and try to distill that into something that's practical and actionable. And hopefully Atomic Habits does that, and hopefully we can do that today as well.
Right. Do you mind sharing your story about how you got onto this I guess how you started to go down this path and become such a world leader on the topic.
Sorry if this is the first time you've shared this story before, James. I know you probably never had to talk about this before.
Well, we all have habits, right? I mean, you guys have mentioned this already. Like, where your brain is building them whether you want to or not. And I think that's a good reason to understand what they are and how they work, because you're going to be forming them. Whatever you repeat, you reinforce. And so you might as well learn how to design the process to work for you. And for most of my early life, I was like everybody else. I was just kind of building habits, but without much structure or thought or strategy behind what was going on. And then I had this moment in high school where I suffered a very serious injury. It was an accident, but I was hit in the face with a baseball bat and broke my nose, broke the bone behind my nose, your ethmoid bone, just like kind of deeper in your skull, shattered both eye sockets. I ended up having to be taken to the hospital. And then when I got to the hospital, I lost the ability to breathe on my own, struggled with the ability to swallow, just like very basic functions. So they intubated me, pumping breath into me by hand. Eventually, they decided the situation was too serious for the local hospital to handle. So they had to air care me to a larger facility. So, they got me on the helicopter. I was unconscious by this point. And then when we landed on the roof of the hospital, they wheeled me into surgery, and I had a seizure. That was actually the second seizure that I had in like this, say, hour and a half since the injury had happened. And so they decided I was too unstable to undergo surgery right then. So they put me into this medically induced coma. And it really wasn't until the next day that my vitals had stabilized to the point where they said, okay, let's release him from the coma. I kind of came back to. And one of the first things I said was, I never asked for this. And, I think it's a very natural response, but one of the things that really helped me was to get out of that mindset. I felt like at first that this was something that had kind of been forced upon me. I hadn't asked for, like, how unlucky, like, how unfair is that?
Mm-hmm.
But
Sorry, how old were you at this stage?
I was 16.
16, right. Yep.
Yeah. But the thing that really carried me through the next few months, because it was a pretty long road back. I couldn't drive a car for the next 9 months. All I really wanted to do was get back and play baseball, but I really wasn't back on the field in any meaningful way until about a year later. My first physical therapy sessions, I was practicing basic motor patterns, like walking in a straight line. I had double vision for about a month. But in the long run, was fortunate and was able to make a full recovery, and getting out of that mindset of feeling like, oh, this is unfair. Why did this happen to me? And instead shifting and trying to focus on, what is some small way I can get better today? How can I have a good session of physical therapy? What small advantage can I gain, or what meaningful improvement can I make? And I really started to look for those things. I think I was lifted up a lot by the people around me. My grandfather in particular and my dad are very positive people, and I kind of fed off of that mindset, and I really needed it at the time. And so anyway, the punchline of this is that for the first few months, I was focused just on recovering, but trying to have good sessions with the doctors and nurses and so on. And then about maybe 6 to 9 months out of that, I started getting back into more normal things. And so I started to focus on, okay, can I, get my study habits kind of dialed in a little bit? Like I don't have to do anything physical. I can just sit here and read or study. And then eventually about a year later, that next year, so I got hurt my sophomore year of high school. My junior year was the first time that I really got into weight training and strength training in the gym. And at first it was really like pretty minimal. It was like 2 days a week. But eventually over the next like 5 years, that started to become a big part of my life. And so in these various ways, study habits, fitness habits, I started to gain a little bit of confidence and rebound, not only from the injury, but also grow and improve. And I ended up I barely played in high school baseball, and then I weaseled my way onto this college team, and I came off the bench my first year. My second year I was a starter, and then third year I was team captain. Fourth year I ended up being an academic All-American, which is there's about 30 players in the country that are on that team. But
Wow.
It was, I never played professionally. My dad actually did play professionally, so I grew up kind of always wanting to do some of that. So I don't think there's anything like necessarily heroic about my story or, amazing about my athletic career. But I can look back now, and I do feel like I fulfilled my potential. Like I made the most of the opportunity that I had. And even though I wasn't good enough to be some amazing all-star professional athlete, I do feel like I made the most of the opportunity I had, and that feels good. And I think ultimately that's all of us really kind of want, like each of us is dealt a certain hand in life, different skills and strengths, different weaknesses. And you just kind of want to feel like you did your best and that you can look back on that and be proud of whatever you were able to make of your particular hand. And
Yeah.
I can't say that I've been able to do that in every area of life, but I have been able to do it in a few. And part of my hope is that Atomic Habits and the principles in it, that the strategies for building good habits and breaking bad ones will help you or whatever reader comes across those strategies to make the most of their, potential too. And so that's a little bit about how my personal story kind of fed into this interest that I have about building habits and improving, and ultimately led me to write about the topic and produce the book.
I think it's amazing. I mean, it's an incredible story, and you might not think it's heroic, but I certainly do. But I think that's the interesting thing for me about that is the fulfilling your potential. Like that feels like the kind of the lesson to be learned, And what we obviously get caught doing, so many of us, myself included, massively get caught via comparison to other people. You find yourself wanting to fulfill not your own potential, but like someone else's potential. And so you sort of you sort of are able to see like, oh, that person is able to do that. I should be able to do that. And if I can't do that, then I fail or I lose. But the way you put it is the focus on fulfilling your own potential is so helpful.
Man, I think so many problems so many arguments that people have online, social media, podcasts, whatever, they devolve from this base position of trying to compare yourself with somebody else. And if you can just make it internal, that single shift where you just start talking about, like health is a very obvious example. There's a lot of health habits. There's a lot of debate about what's the best diet to follow or strength training program to follow or whatever. And as soon as you start making it about like, this is what you should do, and then applying it to other people or comparing other people, the whole conversation devolves and turns into an argument about, you shouldn't tell people what to do with their bodies, or, why do you think this is best for you and not me, and so on. And if you just skip all of that and make it just about you as an individual, what can I do to try to put myself in a better position? All of that stuff just fades away. So I think a lot of the external focus can end up being unhelpful. So making it about a single player game, making it just about you and like, I'm trying to improve my life. And then the second thing is making it about effort and not the result. And it's so easy to say and so hard to do. This is coming from someone who, like, I'm very results oriented and we all want to have good results in our lives. But a lot of the things that I write about are reminders to myself to try to worry a little bit less about the result and a little bit more about, am I giving my best effort? Did I, take the right approach? Am I focused on the process and the habits and not getting wrapped up in the outcomes?
Just that single player game analogy you gave, I feel like that clicks with me so much because it reminds me of when I used to play video games. And if I was playing just by myself, if I was playing like NBA on Xbox or whatever, if I'm just playing by myself, it's relaxing. But as soon as I'm playing 4-player with friends, it becomes really stressful because all these like interpersonal dynamics start happening, and I feel like I'm playing badly because I'm not playing as well as that person, and I get annoyed at the person. Whereas like a single player game, like thinking about life as a single player game where you don't have to actually worry about what other people are doing, just play well yourself. I love that.
And there are some things in life when, sometimes it's fun to play multiplayer, right? Like sometimes it makes sense, and certainly relationships are a big part of life. And so they're going to be, the multiplayer aspect is going to be a big part of life as well. But I don't think that means it needs to be 100% of life. And there are many areas where it makes sense to be much more single player focused. It also allows you to enjoy the process a little bit more and to feel good about yourself. If you go to the gym for the first time and you're just trying to do, a set of 10 squats with the bar and focused on doing it well, that's good. You should feel good about yourself for being in there and doing that. But instead, you look across the gym and you see somebody else with all these plates loaded up and you feel like a weakling and like an idiot because you don't know what to do. And that's all just because you're focused on somebody else and not on your own process and improvement. And so it's just we have all heard this in many different ways, and yet it is a lesson that we all need to be reminded of over and over again.
It's interesting that I hadn't thought about it under this lens, but it feels like it's easy to become I'll just talk about myself here rather than other people, as you've said. It's maybe, to be honest with myself, can be difficult to be like honest to say like, are you actually giving it your best shot? And so turning everything into a more competitive nature, I think, is an alluring thing to distract from the effort and the process that you're putting in yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, if I'm winning, then, who cares if I'm giving my best effort? I'm winning, so it's like, yeah.
But then you also fall into the trap of losing a lot. And then it's
Yeah,
not a nice
yeah.
way to look at other people, really, or yourself.
I came across this line just a couple weeks ago. I thought it was really good. I think the origin is some kind of Winston Churchill quote, but basically what he said was something along the lines of, we don't always need to do our best. Sometimes we need to do what is required. And I thought that was an interesting way to phrase it. If you ask somebody, hey, did you do your best? A lot of the time in theory, that question is great. In practice, I actually feel like it gets used as a crutch a lot of the time. It's almost like people revert back to that when they get defensive. Hey, like, give me a break. I'm trying my best, or I'm just doing my best here. Okay. Like, I know it didn't work out, but like, I'm just doing the best that I can. And that actually is like a shield. It's like a defense mechanism against the criticism that you're getting, or against the fact that you don't have the outcomes that you want. But I think instead, if you ask yourself, did I do what is required for what I'm optimizing for? That's, to me, a much more honest lens. And it gives you a different way of viewing the situation. I mean, one of the core principles in Atomic Habits is that you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And so often in life, we set these big goals for ourselves. We are told we need to be more ambitious, to want it more, to think bigger, to 10x your vision. But the truth is, setting the goal is kind of the easy part. Like, I'm an author, right? So I could set a goal to sell 100 million books. It took me 3 seconds. Like, the goal is not the hard part, right? It's like, it's not difficult to come up with a goal.
Oh, okay. Sorry. It took you 3 seconds to set the goal, not to sell the 100 million copies. Yeah.
Yeah, like it's the collection of habits, the system of behaviors that you need to get you there. That is the difficult part. And so where I've come down on this is not to say, hey, goals are useless. They don't matter at all, because I'm someone who's, I think, very goal oriented. But what I've realized is that for most of the time, goals are good for people who care about winning once. Systems are good for people who care about winning repeatedly. And if you really want to make progress over and over again, if you want to stay on a good path, you need some kind of system, some collection of habits to get you there. And so, like, your goal is your desired outcome. It's a target, the thing you're shooting for. But your system is the collection of habits that you follow. And if we come back to that question I mentioned a few minutes ago, are you doing your best, or are you doing what is required? That's kind of like saying, hey, what is your system? Like, is the collection of habits that you're following each day, is that what is required for this outcome that you want? Are you on another question that I like is, can your current habits carry you to your desired future? You have this thing that you say you're optimizing for, this outcome that you want, but can your current habits get you there? What kind of path are you walking? And if they can, then great. Maybe all you need is patience. But if they can't, then something has to change. And so a lot of this discussion about systems and goals, about doing your best and focusing on effort and process, what it really comes back to is figuring out your trajectory and what kind of path you're on. And I think that is another core principle that I really try to hammer in Atomic Habits, and just the kind of the philosophy of it, which is an emphasis on trajectory rather than position. There's so much discussion about position in life. What's the number in the scale? How much money's in the bank account? What's the stock price? What are the quarterly earnings? We have like all these measurements for figuring out our current position. And then, to bring it back to what you guys said a minute ago, we start comparing positions. Oh, is the number what I wanted it to be? Have I achieved more than what they did? Have we, accomplished what we set out to accomplish? And what I'm kind of encouraging is to say, listen, measurements have a purpose. It's not that they don't matter at all, but just for a minute, can we stop worrying so much about our current position and instead focus a little bit more on our current trajectory? Because if you can, if you're on the right path, if you got the right system, then all you need is time. And so a lot of that comes back to this kind of core focus.
I also think there's a inbuilt sort of compassion for yourself in that trajectory is a lot easier to change. Position's very hard to change.
it almost always takes longer than you think it will. Like a couple years ago, I'm just kind of in okay shape now, but I got in pretty good shape a couple years ago. And it took me about 2 years from when I started working on it to when I actually felt that way. And it was like, man, when I started, I thought, okay, if I can get 3 good months in, like I'll probably be in a good position. But, if I'd known it was going to take 2 years, I probably wouldn't have got started. Writing Atomic Habits, depending on how you measure it, took between 3 and 5 years to write. And, book writing is one of those projects where it's like 90% of the work is left when you think you're 90% done. And that will still be true even if you know that rule. So it's like you expect it to be hard and it's still even harder than you thought. But a lot of the most meaningful things in life are like that. Building a great marriage, raising kids, starting a business, getting in the best shape of your life, pick whatever meaningful thing you want. It's almost always a multi-year thing. And my kind of feeling is you should never dismiss a goal that you want to go after. You should never dismiss something that you feel like is meaningful to you just because it's going to take a long amount of time to do it. The time's going to pass anyway. So 3 years from now, you just be 3 years older and look back and be like, oh, I wish I had started 3 years ago. And so if you can just relieve your need to get to the outcome so quickly and instead start to embrace the lifestyle and the system and the process, the days click by just fine. The time will magnify whatever you feed it. So if you have good habits, time becomes your ally. And every day that goes by, you put yourself in a little better position. May not be where you want to be yet, but you're in a stronger position. The trajectory is working for you. But if you have bad habits, time becomes your enemy. And every day that goes by, you dig the hole a little bit deeper. And so it's really just about getting the path right and then having enough patience to wait for the rewards to accumulate.
So James, I find myself really rushing towards wanting practical things here, and
easy boy. Yeah, wait for it. It'll come. Bit of patience.
But to give you context as to why, I guess. So Josh and my dad had a health scare last year with his heart. And it's a hereditary thing that we will sort of be dealing with at some point, as in personally.
Yeah, I already do, to a degree.
Yeah. And as sort of Josh mentioned at the top of the interview, I'm a 400-meter runner, so I train very hard for that, and I love track and field. And because of that, I have lots of really healthy habits to help me run as fast as possible. And when Dad had the health scare, he talked about the things that put Josh and myself, well, all our family sort of at risk in the future. And I got really very emotional and quite stressed about Josh, I suppose, and it just doesn't. I mean, one of the big things is physical exercise, which Josh doesn't love physical exercise. And we've talked about that a lot on the podcast. And so when I heard that you were coming on the show, I was just so excited because I thought, I think it's habits really for Josh would be, I think it's habits that's going to, I mean, everything you've said so far has got me very excited for Josh. But I do feel like it's just starting. For me, I feel like with Josh, it's just starting to form some good habits that will get him exercising in a way that are going to protect his heart, basically, which I think about a lot, probably more than I've said to Josh before to his face. But I do think I spend so much time thinking about Josh's health and wanting him to exercise. And I do think habits this is a long way of saying I'm excited you're here, and please tell me some practical things that
I can do.
That Josh can do.
So there are many things that we can cover. There are 3 things that are coming to mind right now. So let me before I get to 2 of them are practical, and then the third one is more of like a framework. So why don't we, which all of you are probably familiar with, but I kind of feel like we should cover what the 4 laws are, just so that everybody's kind of in the same mindset. And then I'll talk about some of the practical things. So I cover this in the book, but basically I talk about the science of how habits form, which I'm happy to talk about if you guys want to get into it more. But for the moment, I'll just say there's a much longer discussion about that in the book, and there are many reasons behind these things. But basically, you can break a habit into 4 stages. And what I like to do is to make it practical. How do I translate what's going on from a scientific standpoint into something that is actionable and I can utilize? So I've come up with what I call the 4 laws of behavior change. And the first law is to make it obvious. So you want the cues of your habits, the things that spark them, to be obvious, available, visible, easy to see. The easier it is to see, the easier it is for the habit to get started. The second law is to make it attractive. The more attractive or appealing a habit is, the more motivating or enticing it is, the more likely they are to feel compelled to do it. The third law is to make it easy. So easier, more convenient, frictionless, simple a habit is, the more likely it is to be performed. And then the fourth and final law is to make it satisfying. The more satisfying or enjoyable a habit is, the more rewarding or pleasurable it is, the more likely you are to feel compelled to repeat it in the future. So make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, make it satisfying. I think if you're someone listening to this and you're sitting there and you kind of have a habit or two in the back of your mind that you're like, I would love to, for this conversation to help me start that habit, but I keep procrastinating on it, or I can't quite get started. Or sometimes people think about it in a business context. If you have a team that you're managing or leading, or you're coaching, somebody, you might think of a behavior that you want to help them shape. And I think you can just go through these 4 laws and ask yourself, keep that habit in the back of your mind and ask yourself, how can I make it obvious? How can I make it attractive? How can I make it easy? How can I make it satisfying? And just those 4 questions alone will start to call forth answers and reveal some things that you could do to increase the odds that whatever that habit is that you're thinking about is going to occur. So make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, make it satisfying. That's the big 10,000 foot view, the big picture view. There are many ways to do each of those things. There are many ways to make habits obvious, many ways to make them easy, and so on. And Atomic Habits covers all that in much greater detail. But there are 2 things in particular that stood out to me when you were mentioning this question and kind of diving into it. So the first thing is, a lot of the habits that people choose, I think this is particularly true with fitness habits, but I think it's true in general. I feel like people pick habits that they think they should have rather than the habits they want to have. The most common New Year's resolution is some form of fitness habit, go to the gym, whatever. And I think a lot of people go to the gym because they feel like society's expecting them to go to the gym, or they're supposed to go to the gym or something. And I like lifting weights, but not everybody wants to work out like a bodybuilder, and that's fine. There are many ways to live a healthy and active lifestyle. And I think one of the first and perhaps most important questions to ask yourself if you're building a new habit is, what would this look like if it was fun for me? What's the most enjoyable version of this habit? And you can rock climbing, kayaking, running 400 meters, pick whatever you want. Yoga, there's a million things that you could come up with. And that doesn't mean that your habits will always be the most fun thing in your life. It doesn't mean that every habit's going to feel like going to a concert or playing a video game or whatever. But it does mean that pretty much any habit can be more fun than the default, can be more enjoyable than just taking what you feel like people are telling you to do and doing that. So I do think it's worth taking that question seriously. What would meditation look like if it was fun? What would writing thank you notes look like if it was fun? What would going to the gym look like if it was fun? And try to figure out some version of that feels naturally kind of compelling to you. I think the reality is we all have seen this in different ways in our life. If you find something that you are genuinely interested in, that kind of is pulling you in, that you're engaged with and excited about and curious about, if you're interested in it, the opportunities to improve will be almost endless. You'll just kind of naturally be finding things that you can latch onto, or a different element of the experience that you could optimize. If you're not genuinely interested in it, if you're just kind of forcing yourself to do it, even the obvious improvements are going to feel like a hassle. So to give you just one more example of this, it's kind of fitness related. I think one of the best fitness apps that's ever been created has nothing to do with fitness. It was like Pokemon Go. People downloaded that app and then they went and walked 10 kilometers a day just trying to find, different Pokemon stuff. And it probably got more people moving than 99.9% of fitness apps. And it's because it happened through this trap door of what was fun, what was exciting. And so I think that is a question that You may not have an answer immediately that comes to mind, but it is worth thinking about seriously. Just lean your head against that for an hour or two and see if you can come up with a trap door for your habit that feels fun.
Yeah.
I think you get the idea, but it's just, it's going to be a different answer for each person. I think that's worth thinking about. So, what would this look like if it was fun? Second thing that came to mind is we could say that there are kind of two broad problems that people deal with habits. The first problem is getting started, and the second problem is sticking with it. Now, if you drill down a little bit more and you think about sticking with it, what does consistency look like? Mostly, it's just the act of getting started again each day. And so, kind of both of those problems boil down to getting started, figuring out a way to make it as easy as possible to get started each day or whatever the frequency is you're doing for your habit. Now, if you were to talk to an academic or a researcher about what a habit is and ask them, hey, give me some examples of habits, they're going to tell you that it's like an automatic mindless behavior, something like brushing your teeth or tying your shoes, or, every time you pick up a pair of barbecue tongs, you tap them together twice. It's like stuff that you don't even think about, just like automatic, right?
So
but
true.
if I were to ask you, like, hey, what are some habits that you're trying to build? What are habits that you're focused on? You're probably not going to pick mindless stuff like tying your shoes or brushing your teeth. You're going to say, I want to get in the habit of writing every day, or I want to get in the habit of doing yoga 4 days a week, or something like that. And so the habits that we care about, the routines that we want to build, are usually kind of bigger and more effortful. They require some level of concentration in life. They're not mindless the way that like most of the academically defined habits would be. So how do we bridge that gap? Like, how do you make an automatic mindless behavior, a quick routine out of something that requires more effort and concentration, the things that we really care about? I think the answer is, and this comes back to that core problem of how do I make it easy to get started? You try to focus on the first 30 seconds or the first 2 minutes of the action, and you make that small chunk of the behavior, that little segment, as automatic and as mindless and habitual as possible. And if you can use the strategies that are covered in the book and that we'll talk about here, if you can make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, make it satisfying for those first 2 minutes, then what you find is that the momentum often carries you forward. So for me, one of the habits that makes the biggest difference in my life is writing the next piece of content. Maybe it's a chapter of a book or a newsletter or whatever it is, but it's sitting down and writing. And that's a pretty effortful thing. It's never mindless and automatic. So usually when I start my day, I go to my office, let's say it's 9 a.m., and one of two things happens. Either I open up Google Docs and I start writing the next thing I'm going to work on, or I go to my favorite sports site and I start reading about the latest sports news. And what happens in the first hour is basically shaped by what happens in the first 30 seconds. Because if I start reading about sports, the hour is shot, right? But if I start writing, even if it's just a sentence or two, then it's okay, now the momentum carries me forward and I'm sort of into the work. And so to bring this back to the original question, hey, how can you build these fitness habits? How can you start to, find, establish a habit for yourself that helps get you in better shape or, feeds your personal health? I think if you make it about the 45-minute workout, it's almost like that's too big. And it starts to feel like a hassle, like a chore that you don't want to get into. But if you just make it about the first 2 minutes and you do whatever you can to make that obvious and attractive and easy and satisfying, a lot of the time by the time you're 2 minutes into the workout, it's okay, now I just kind of feel like finishing the rest of it. So I think optimizing for the starting line, not the finish line, is often a good way to start when you're focused on building a new habit. There's this kind of, this is the last thing I'll say here, and then I'll let you guys jump back in. But there's this implicit assumption people often have when they're building habits. I don't think people say it out loud, but it's kind of in the back of their mind. You sit down, you start thinking about what are the habits I want to build? What would it look like if I was at peak performance? Or what could I do if I was at my best? What would it look like if I was, fulfilling my potential? And it's really easy when you're in that mindset. I think it's very natural to be there, but it's very easy to bite off more than you can chew or to get really excited about the habits. And you start listing out 5 or 6 or 10 habits you want to build. You come up with what your perfect workout program would look like. And I think rather than asking yourself, hey, what could I do on my best day? You should start by saying, what can I stick to even on the bad days? And that's your baseline for the habit that you're trying to build. You scale it down so it's so easy to do that you almost can't say no to it, even when you're feeling stressed and tired and exhausted. And if you can just focus on that and establishing this kind of habit, becoming that kind of person in a small way, well, now we can start to advance and, upgrade and improve from there. So just a couple disparate thoughts there on
Yeah.
how to think about the habit and how to approach it.
I mean, it sort of reminds me of, because, we've talked a lot about physical movement and fitness and health and stuff, but it reminds me a lot of even creative goals. Like you've talked a bit about it with your writing in your newsletter, which reaches 2 million people a week or a month, something like that. It's a lot. And but the thing, people sometimes talk to me about starting a podcast. They want to start a podcast or they want to write a film or a TV show. And the effort that is required to write a feature film or to have a podcast, there's sort of no real cap on what that could be. I think people look at a podcast and go, oh, well, that's doing episodes every week or every fortnight or whatever. But there's no. It's such a big effort. So what happens often with podcasts is they'll start a podcast and they'll do 2 or 3 episodes, realize how much work it is, and they'll sort of stop and then feel like they failed at their podcast. So what this is via what I've just learned from trial and error over the years is, instead of, if you're thinking of writing a film or a TV show or doing a podcast or whatever, writing a newsletter, instead of committing to doing it forever, just commit to doing it for like a month. So for a podcast, go like, I'm going to make a podcast and I make the first season 3 episodes. And so you can at least then complete something. And for me, I've always found like there's a real sense of achievement if you can finish something, even if you set the measurement of where that finish line is, in the same way that it sort of reminds me of how you're saying, just think about working out for 2 minutes. So I'll say like, just write a short film that goes for a minute. Like write a 1 minute short film. That will be so much easier to complete and to say like, I did it, I finished it, now I'll do another one, as opposed to going, I'm going to write a feature film, which might take 5-10 years to do. And it's really, really hard to motivate yourself.
There's a lot of things going on there. I mean,
Thank you.
first of all, it just feels good to make progress. One of the most motivating feelings to the human mind is feeling of progress. Even if it's smaller than what you ultimately hope to do, it just feels good to be moving forward. And so in some ways, we're a victim of our own expectations when we set off to write a feature film or get in the best shape of our life or do whatever the big thing is, rather than just focusing on doing something small and getting a feeling of success, getting a feeling of improvement. One of those practical strategies I mentioned in the book is what I call the 2-minute rule. And it is so simple. It just says, take whatever habit you're trying to build and scale it down to something that takes 2 minutes or less to do. So read 30 books a year becomes read 1 page, or do yoga 4 days a week becomes take out my yoga mat. And sometimes people resist it a little bit when I say that, they're like, okay, buddy, like I know the real goal isn't just to take my yoga mat out. I know I'm actually trying to do the workout here. So if this is some kind of mental trick and I know it's a trick, then why would I fall for it, basically? But I think the thing that people often fail to realize, and this is like a deep truth about habits, is that a habit must be established before it can be improved. You have to make it the standard in your life before you can scale it up and turn it into something more. And I don't know why we do this, but we tend to get very all or nothing about our habits. We're so focused on optimizing, on finding like the perfect sales strategy, the best business idea, the ideal diet plan. We're so focused on optimizing that we don't give ourselves permission to show up, even if it's just in a small way. But like, if you can't become the kind of person that goes to the gym for 2 minutes, 4 days a week, who cares how good the 45-minute workout plan is? Like it's just a theory at that point. And I'm reminded of that quote from Ed Lattimore where he says the heaviest weight at the gym is the front door. Like, there are a lot of things in life that are like that, The heaviest step is the first one. Hardest action is the first movement. And so scaling it down, whether it's the 2-minute rule or something else, and kind of giving yourself permission to show up in a small way is a great way to get started, get some feedback, get in the arena and gain a foothold. And then you can scale it up and optimize from there. But if you're so focused on the planning part of it, sometimes you never even get started and don't have anything to optimize anyway. I think the other thing that you sparked was this thought of planning is often its own form of procrastination. We're so focused on our preparation and on learn. We have this story that we tell ourselves of like, well, I'm not quite ready to get started yet. I need to learn more. And it's not that research and preparation and planning aren't useful. It's just that at some point it becomes a crutch. Like if your preparation is complementing the actions you're already taking, great. It's probably really helpful. But if it's substituting for actions you should be taking, now it's just a crutch and you're using it as a way to kind of do the thing that you probably can't fail on. Like, is it really possible to fail researching, what show to create or what diet to follow? You kind of can just do that endlessly and feel okay about it. But to actually take the risk and do it, well, now you're actually risking a little bit of failure and you need enough courage to show up. And so I think I also like strategies like the 2-minute rule because they encourage you to get started, get a little bit of feedback. And then, of course, that's the ultimate truth as well. Often the best way to learn is by getting started, is by getting in the mix that you figure out what actually works or what you specifically do or don't like. And that's very helpful feedback to have.
What's your feeling on as far as accountability? So I'm not sure if you talk about this in Atomic Habits, but as far as accountability, whether it be from a person or from setting yourself, I don't know, like accountability for me is very, very helpful in achieving things. What's your vibe on accountability?
If I look at my own behavior, it definitely matters to me, but there is a little bit of nuance with it. So my newsletter, 321, I write it every week. It goes out every Thursday. And I started it. So my kind of arc as a writer, the thing that sort of launched my career was I wrote a new article every Monday and Thursday. And I did that for 3 years. So that was what built the audience that got me the book deal for Atomic Habits. And then I wrote the book. And then the book came out. So I had this newsletter, but then I had all this stuff going on with the book. And I was like, I need to change the format to something that can fit my current lifestyle and workload. So in 2019, I switched to this 3-2-1 format. 3 short ideas from me, 2 quotes from other people, 1 question to think about for the week. And knock on wood, like so far, I've never missed. So it's been 4.5 years now. And I like it. I enjoy it. It's great. And it's a scale that works well for me. And so the expectation that the audience knows it's coming on Thursday, that accountability is one of the primary things that makes sure I never miss despite all the stuff that's happened over the last 4 years. So that, when I look at my own behavior and I see things like that, I'm like, okay, obviously that matters. But not everything can have something so public like that, such a public form of accountability. And there's other things that I've done a good job of sticking to at various times. Like I've more or less worked out for the last 10 years. There's been, a month or 2 here or there where I haven't done it, but for the most part, I've been pretty consistent. Nobody sees that. I don't post my workouts on Instagram or anything. I don't even track them in an app. I just write them down on a notebook. So why am I doing that if the accountability is not there? And I think for me, there needs to be some deep intrinsic motivation for something like that. And the way that I would describe it is that accountability is kind of like an accelerant. It's like a fuel that you can, jet fuel that you can add to the process. But that alone it's hard for me to sustain a habit for very long if I don't also have the intrinsic desire to do it. It's just that the accountability will kind of help propel it as well.
Yep.
And this is getting into what I consider to be one of the other core ideas that's covered in the book, which is identity and the connection between your habits and your identity. And that's how I would ultimately describe this intrinsic motivation. The reason that I've been able to stick with my workout habit is because I like that part of my identity. I like being able to view myself as I'm the type of person who doesn't miss workouts, or I'm the type of person who enjoys moving my body. And when that becomes part of how you see yourself, sure, I want all the other stuff that comes with working out too. I want to be in good shape and to look good in the mirror and to hit a PR in the gym and all that stuff. But I can feel successful about the workout when I'm in the middle of doing a set of squats. I don't need to wait for the rewards or for the visible outcomes. I can just feel good because I'm being the kind of person I want to be. And I think ultimately this is the real reason, the like deeper reason that habits matter. We talk about habits as mattering because of all the external results they can get you. Hey, habits will help you make more money or reduce stress or be more productive or get fit. And it's true that habits can help you do that stuff. But I think the deeper reason that habits matter is that every action you take is like a vote for the type of person you wish to become. So, no, writing one sentence does not finish the next book for me, but it does cast a vote for I'm a writer. And no, doing one set of push-ups does not transform my body, but it does cast a vote for I'm the type of person who doesn't miss workouts. And I think that's another key question to start with. You know, a lot of the time when we start with our habits and what we want to build, we start by asking ourselves, hey, what kind of results do I want? What do I want to achieve this year? And instead, I think it can often be more useful to ask yourself, who is the type of person I wish to become? Who is the type of person that could achieve those results that I say that I want? And what are my habits reinforcing? How am I casting votes for becoming that kind of person? And once you can draw this through line from your habits to your identity, I think you start to have a much deeper reason for doing that stuff each day. And that, to me, that's like the ultimate form of accountability, is that I'm accountable to myself because that's the kind of person that I want to be. And it feels natural and connected with this deeper story that I tell myself about who I am.
Love it.
I've recently embedded I think it's one of the few, maybe I'm being a bit harsh on myself here, but I feel like when it comes to mine, one of the few positive habits that I've been able to change a little bit in myself. We did Bridget, the producer here, and myself went and did this 2-day mental health course on resilience. And one of the things that they said was one of the best things you can do for your day is to basically get your cup of coffee if you're a coffee drinker. And first thing you do in the day is get your coffee and go outside and just let the sun, drink it in the sun, basically. Don't look at a screen, don't do anything like that. And that to me felt, because I've got 2 young kids, 5 minutes by myself at the start of the day sounded pretty great and pretty enticing and pretty exciting. And I started doing that, and I've been pretty good at keeping it up, I'd say almost every day for a few months now. And I was shocked at how great it made me feel for a start, just an immediate reset and intention for the day, and how I was able to, it was really mind-blowing. But what I'm finding interesting, and it's a question I had for you, is that and maybe we can go into what Hugh said before, because I found it interesting. I found myself getting really defensive and repelling a bit when you were talking before about changing an exercise habit. But when just that simple act of going outside and drinking a coffee, and now I've started doing a little bit of gardening when I get out there, and I find myself ending up doing 10 minutes of gardening out there while I'm having my coffee, like weeding or doing little things in the garden, and seeing incremental slow gains in the garden. But I also have started to feel like maybe I could do a tiny bit of exercise in the morning. Maybe. I don't think I can yet, but maybe there's a chance that one day I could. But I've never seen myself as someone who could have that identity, to use the phrasing you've just had. So I guess a question is, can habits be contagious to other areas of your life?
No doubt. There's a lot of examples of this. You know, I came across tons of reader stories like this when I was working on the book, but people who, you know, they get their finances in order and they start a budgeting habit, and then all of a sudden they feel like they kind of have this urge to work out a little bit more. Or people who, you know, they start meditating, and then all of a sudden they're like, well, after I get done with that, I want to sit down and write. And, you know, and it's like the momentum bleeds into other areas for sure. Momentum is a really powerful thing in life, and it goes both ways. You know, like you sit on the couch and you don't do very much, it becomes easier to just kind of sit around because you don't feel like you have any energy. And then if you can like somehow figure out a way to reverse the course and you just start moving a little bit, get your shoes on and walk around the block, you don't have to do a full workout, all of a sudden moving a little bit, you feel like moving a little more. And there's so many things that are like that in life. You know, you don't talk to anybody for a while, you feel kind of insulated, start to feel a little bit lonely. You just get more lonely. You don't feel like talking to anybody and you're in a bad mood. You go into walk into a room and smile a little bit and be the first one to say hello. All of a sudden conversations start flowing. Feels like it's a little bit easier to talk to somebody. And so just like there's so many areas of life that are like that. The momentum can go both ways, and a little bit of a shift starts to feel like you can feed off of that. My first encouragement would be to say, take what's working for you right now and just like lean into that, like maybe don't even worry too much about the fitness habit. But if the coffee and the sunshine and the gardening is feeling good to you, great. Like just lean into that and, like try to make that part of your day and feel good. And that momentum will naturally start to go somewhere else. And I think, you can also, this is something I talk about in the book, but you can layer your habits on top of each other. You can start to stack them on top like links in a chain. So you wake up, you make a cup of coffee, you go sit outside, garden for 5 or 10 minutes. Maybe you do, I don't know, 10 jumping jacks or 1 set of push-ups or whatever it is, like, 10 air squats. We can call it like the most micro mini workout ever, like it could just literally be 1 set, but that's just something that you do that gets tied on to the end of it. And it feels like, okay, now I've completed this little routine at the beginning of my day and I can go on with the rest of my day. And if you like it, if you find a version of it that feels good to you, great. Maybe it can grow into something more. So yes, to answer your question, I think all of that can happen. There's one other comment I just wanted to make. I almost hesitate to say stuff like this because I don't want to act like I'm dismissing like the really big problems that can happen in life, because they're true and all of us face those moments of challenge. But your point about you make your cup of coffee and you sit in the sun and you're surprised by how good that makes you feel, or how meaningful of an impact that had for being such a small thing. Sometimes I remind myself of that. I'll ask myself a question like, are things really not going well right now? Or do you just need to take a nap or drink a glass of water or go for a walk? And like, you would be surprised. We're biological beings. You cannot be a human outside of a body. And to sit in the sun for 5 minutes or to go for a walk or to get an extra hour of sleep is such an obvious thing, but like our minds start racing off and acting like we have all these other problems. The brain is so good at making minor problems feel major. And like half of the problems in your life is just your brain emphasizing things to an unhealthy degree. And it's like, if you can just get your like body set, give yourself the natural things that you need, take a walk, drink some water, get a little bit of sleep, sit in the sun, you'd be surprised how many of those things suddenly are right-sized to the appropriate degree. Your problems, I feel like all of your problems scale themselves to the appropriate degree after a good night of sleep and a hard workout. And all of a sudden you can see things much more clearly.
Yep. I like a couple of weeks ago, I was sick for a few days, and I like my reaction to just feeling sick for a few days and not getting much sleep and waking up with like a dry mouth is I bought a humidifier and I bought an air purifier for my house. And then like 2 days later, I felt fine. I was like, why did I buy those things? And now they're just sitting in my house. I felt like, no, I'll need that because I feel sick and this is obviously me
That'll
forever
fix
now.
the problem.
Yeah, that'll fix the problem. But no, I just actually probably needed to get better and just sleep more.
I wanted to delve more into the my reaction to what Hugh was saying before, because I'm interested to know a bit more about what the resistant force is. Like I'd love the idea of being fit, and the thought of me not getting fit and having less time with my kids because I don't live long is awful and so selfish. But there is a resistant force there that stops me from doing it. And I wondered if you had any insight on what that resistant force is that stops you, even when you have a desire to change, that stops you. Because I did say, I misspoke, I think, before, because I think I said changing a trajectory is easy. I meant changing it like a millimeter can be easy. But I know in my own life that changing trajectory on that specific thing is it almost still feels impossible. And I wonder if you had insight on what that resistant force is.
Well, I mentioned identity a moment ago. And the thing about identities is that they can work for you or against you. And we all have multiple elements of who we are and our story and, what makes up the type of person that we are. And sometimes it's really helpful to try to foster and build a new identity. And the more that you start to buy into that, the more pride that you take about the habit and the stronger the habit becomes. So like if you take pride in the size of your biceps, you never skip arm day at the gym,
Guilty.
And so ultimately where we're hoping to get to is this point where you start to feel like, hey, this is part of my story. This is part of who I am. And you'll fight to maintain that habit. But that can also work against you, because the tighter that you cling to an identity, the harder it becomes to grow beyond it. And so if you have a part of your story from the past, a portion of your identity that maybe doesn't serve you as much anymore, it could have served you in the previously. This is something else that I remind myself of a lot. I'll tell myself, like, I have all these things that I want to do, but it's not reasonable to try to do them all at the same time. And so the question I ask is, what season am I in right now? And what you often find is that when your seasons change, you go from not having kids to having kids. You go from one job to another. You move from one city to another. There are many inflection points in life. It could be many things. But when your seasons change, your habits often need to change. And I find that with myself, I'm often still trying to force fit my old habits into this new season. And it usually takes me, I'm a pretty slow learner on it, honestly. It usually takes me like 18 months to 2 years to figure out, oh, hey, like you've shifted seasons. Like you need to change your habits. And that's obvious and easy to do when the habit doesn't really serve you that much. But it's much harder to do when it was actually a good habit in your previous season. It served you really well, but it just has kind of outlived its usefulness now. And you're like, listen, that could be a good chapter of my life. And we just need to close that chapter for a minute. And the habit needs to change shape or to shift into something new. And you can see this in many different ways. When people cling to a previous identity, but the world has changed, either their individual world, they're in a new season, or the world at large, it becomes hard to grow in a useful way. You can imagine like a physician, this doctor who has a surgeon who has one way of doing the operation. They've done it that way for 20 years. It's gotten them really great results with their patients. But then new technology comes out and they kind of ignore it because they're like, I don't need that. Like I know the way that I do it. I know this has worked for my patients. And suddenly 3 years later, they're behind the curve, and their outcomes aren't as good. Or a teacher who has taught their lesson plan one way the whole time, and then a new piece of technology comes, or the internet launches or whatever, and they don't incorporate it into their classroom, and all of a sudden their students are behind. And so sometimes the identities that we have are so deeply entrenched that we almost don't even think about them that way. Like, I have a sweet tooth is an identity. I never even thought about it like that until I started writing the book, and I was like, oh, like I tell myself that all the time. I love chocolate. It tastes really good. And that's fine if the habit is in the right zone and you don't eat it so much that it, impacts your life negatively. But I'm bad at math. I'm terrible at directions. I'm the type of person that isn't good at remembering people's names. All those things are examples of identities that maybe don't serve you. But the more that you tell yourself that, and the more that things conflict with that, you're just going to resist them. So I think the question that I would have, and I don't know the answer to it for you, but maybe you can just sit with it for a little bit and think about what feels right to you. If we're talking about building a fitness habit and you feel some resistance or some defensiveness towards that, I think I would ask, like, what element of your identity do you feel like that's conflicting with? What part of your story do you feel like, when you tell yourself, I'm not the type of person that would do that? Or is there something that you feel where you're like, if I say that I want to do this now, I'm kind of admitting to myself that the last 10 years, the way that I've been living was wrong or was something that I didn't want to do. And I don't think that it has to be that way, but I think that sometimes we don't see that there's another option, another way of viewing it. And so if we do feel like that, like nobody wants to feel like their way of living life is wrong, right? Everybody wants to just feel like, hey, I'm doing the best I can and I've like tried to make my way. And, like I made good decisions with the information that I had. We all want to feel like that. So I think if you can kind of release some of those emotions and just try to make the best next choice for where you're at, rather than inheriting all these previous choices, then maybe you can see it in like a fresh way. There's something that, athletic sports coaches or football coaches talk about a lot, which is next play mentality. Like you could spend your time talking about how, the other team cheated or, it was unfair how the ball bounced or we made a mistake on the last play, but that doesn't help you make a good play in the next moment. And so I kind of think sometimes it's really useful to live your life like that too. How can I have the next play mentality, not inherit too much of my previous identity and let that conflict with what the best next choice would be for me and the situation that I'm in right now?
Yeah.
Does any of that resonate? How does that? What's your kind of feeling when you hear?
Yeah, it does. I was trying to think: does he want this question to be hypothetical, or does he want me to answer the question? Because the immediate feeling, and sorry if we're making this a bit too personal about me, but the immediate feeling is that I'm a failure I'm a failure with exercise. So that's the identity I hold on to, that it's the dropping the habit and being a failure that is just inevitable. And but there's a lot to process here, because I guess if you then go through the other things you've been saying about all the stuff you've been layering on here during the conversation, with like the way you approach things, making it so easy. I don't know. I still.
Yeah, it's so interesting how we do this stuff to ourselves. I mean, I don't have much context on your background or anything like that, but I hear a phrase like that and I'm like, it doesn't have to be that way. Like, we don't have to make it. We don't have to turn it into this huge thing. Really, all you have to do is live one good day, and then you go to sleep and you wake up tomorrow and you try to do the same thing. And you can wake up and have your coffee in the sun and go hang out in the garden for 10 minutes. And then do some small form of a workout, whatever that is that sounds interesting to you. And this labeling or assigning of like, I'm a failure with exercise, or turning it into some like bigger predestined thing, doesn't even need to be a part of that individual day. You can just focus on living a good day now and having a good 5 minutes, whatever that might be. You can do a lot with 5 good minutes. 5 good minutes of push-ups can make you really winded, and it's a great workout. 5 good minutes of conversation can restore a relationship. 5 good minutes of writing can make you feel like you're making progress on the manuscript again. So you really don't need a lot to reverse the energy or to shift the momentum. And I think once you start turning it into like it has to be this bigger thing, that's when your mind gets ahead of yourself, and like, it doesn't need to be that. It can just be in this moment and do these, do this for the next 5 minutes and then go on with the rest of your day.
I think I know what that feels like in other areas of life. So it's exciting to me to try and take that feeling into other areas that are less desirable, if that makes sense.
I think one of the hard things too is, I'm not guaranteeing that it's going to work or that it's going to happen, but I am asking that you at least believe that it's possible. And if you can at least believe that it's possible, if you can look somewhere else in your life, like you said, you have other examples of this where you're like, you know what, I just like focused on the small thing and I just did that for that day and it turned into something more meaningful.
Yeah.
If you at least believe that there's a possibility of that, that's all you need. And you can just show up again the next day and focus on that little thing. And then, it can turn into something more over time. But you definitely don't need to like have it all planned out from the start. One final thing that I'll add to this, just because I think a lot of people have those kind of feelings with their habits where I know this isn't going to end well for me. I've tried this before. I've tried to get started before and then I fell off course. And I think one of the problems is that we have a weird definition in our heads, even if we don't explicitly say it, of what a successful habit would look like. We kind of think, if I was going to be successful with exercise, that would mean that I'm going to get started with this habit and I will do it for the rest of my life. And there is no habit that works that way. If we just mentioned my writing habit, I think for the most part, we could say I have a pretty good writing habit. It's gotten me pretty good results for, the things that I've created. It's built the business for me over the last 12 years now. But it has looked very different at different stages. The first 3 years, I wrote these 2 articles every Monday and Thursday. I haven't done that in 7 years now. So does that mean that habit was a failure? Or does that mean that habit was like really good for that chapter? I've been doing 3-2-1 for 4 years now. That's a very different style of writing habit, but I've stuck to it for 4 years. If I stop next year, does that mean that it was a failure or just that it was really good for that chapter? And so I think that we all go through many chapters in life. And to expect for you to only be successful if you stick to this workout habit in that form forever, it doesn't match with the dynamics of life and the ever-changing, evolving need. And so I think your habits are naturally going to change shape over time, and you need to give yourself permission for that, for it to just be like, hey, even if I only do this habit for 5 days this week and that's it, that's fine. Maybe that was the little chapter I needed and I learned something from that. And then the habit can change shape and it can, fit me whatever my life is next week. And eventually, if you believe that change is possible and you have a willingness to try things out like that, and you're not defining success only in like one very narrow fashion, you should be able to find a pattern that works for you and that feels like, yeah, like that fits with my lifestyle and it feels right.
That was awesome. I really resonated with that last point.
And if I could just make this about me for a second. Sorry, it's been very Josh. All cool. We can cut that down. No, I actually want to reiterate, or not reiterate, but I want to kind of like add to it really, because for such a long time, like I've never been an exercise person, and like as an identity thing, like you're talking about, James, it's my identity was always like I don't do regular exercise. There was a period where I played mixed netball, and I did Pilates for a while, and for a while, like those are things that I did and really enjoyed, and then they just stopped for various reasons. Now I'm doing something, and I got a Peloton bike, so I've been riding the Peloton bike every morning, and I do it with my partner Jam. So the way that we do it, because neither of us have been big exercise people our entire life, and so when we were away, I was like, okay, when we're coming back, we're going to start getting up at 6 a.m. every morning together. Like we get up at 6, and this works for us. We don't have kids, so this works for us. We get up at 6 a.m. every morning, and we'll do Peloton and stretching and different things, and then we go to like a sauna together. Like that's a sort of a routine that we do every morning. So getting up at 6 a.m. is a hellish thought, really, for most people. But what I found really helped is I gave it a fun name. So it's not getting up at 6 a.m. It's I'm too sexy. So I call it I'm too sexy. So it's kind of like fun and kind of cute. So to me, I feel like any event, if you give it like a fun name or think of like a clever name, it makes it, for me at least, it's much more desirable to want to do it, because it's like, yeah, cool, we're doing the I'm too sexy club thing instead of getting up at 6 every morning, which sounds shit.
This is second law of behavior change. Make it attractive.
Yeah.
Like it's just whatever ways you can find to make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying. The more that you can do those things, the more you're going to basically shift the levers in the right position to make good habits more likely to form.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a great example of that.
I mean, as a result, just to put a button on that, like as a result, I now, even though this is wild, because in the past, if I'd go to a doctor and they'd ask me like, oh, what's your regular exercise? And I'd like be really embarrassed, and I'd be like, I walk a lot, and it'd be really minimal exercise that I would do. Now I genuinely feel like I'm someone who exercises every day, and I've never felt like that. I never would have thought I would have been that person, but it's just happened, and now it doesn't seem as strange to get on an exercise bike every day. But it's just now like, that's just what I do. That's what we do.
I think that point that you just made, I never would have expected that, out of myself, or I never would have thought I'd be that kind of person. It speaks to what I kind of feel like is my strategy with this habits and behavior change and kind of identity. Behavior and beliefs are a two-way street. So what you believe about yourself shapes the way that you act, but the way that you act can also shape what you believe. And the more that you take actions, the more evidence you provide of being that kind of person. So this concept of every action you take is a vote for the type of person that you wish to become. The reason that, waking up one day at 6 a.m. and getting on the Peloton doesn't change very much about your life. But doing it day after day, you keep casting votes, you keep adding evidence to the pile. Now all of a sudden you have this new way to view yourself, this new lens for thinking about who you are and what you stand for. If you walk outside today and shoot a basketball for 5 minutes, you don't think, oh, I'm a basketball player. But if you go out there every day for the next 2 years, at some point you cross this invisible threshold where you kind of have to admit to yourself, I guess basketball is kind of a big part of who I am. And every habit is like that. And so, this is why I said earlier, I'm not saying you need to believe, oh, I can be the kind of person who loves working out. I'm just saying you need to be open to the possibility that your behavior can kind of shape your beliefs. And if you believe that, you can kind of leave all the judgment and the identity stuff at the door for right now. You don't really need to think about it that much. And you just focus on showing up in a small way. And then all of a sudden you turn around 3 months or 6 months or 2 years later, and you got all this evidence for being that kind of person. You're like, yeah, like I actually do kind of feel like this is who I am now. And my recent history shows that. And so I'm really big on how your habits provide evidence of who you are and reinforce or embody. Your habits are how you embody a particular identity. Every day that you make your bed, you embody the identity of being clean and organized. Every time that you study biology for 20 minutes, you embody the identity of being studious. And so your habits kind of reinforce that identity that you have. And I think that's more powerful than what you often hear, which is like fake it till you make it. I don't necessarily have anything wrong with fake it till you make it. It's asking you to believe something positive about yourself, but it's asking you to believe something positive without having evidence for it. And we have a word for beliefs that don't have evidence. We call it delusion, right? Like your brain doesn't like this mismatch about what you say you are and what you're actually doing. So my encouragement, my suggestion is to start in some small way and to let the behavior lead the way. To start with one sales call or 1 minute of meditation or one push up or whatever, and let that be evidence that you were that kind of person.
Brilliant.
James, this is officially the least I've ever spoken on an interview that we have done. And that has been very deliberate on my part, because anytime I was speaking, you're not able to speak. I just wanted to hear more of you. That was just, thank you so much. I mean, I know for you, you've been talking about this stuff for a long time. So I don't know if it's worn off on you how brilliant it is, but it really is. It's very transformational, has been for a lot of people. And I think there's a couple of things that your level of expertise on it, but also the humility with which you bring it into our awareness, I think is really beautiful. And I think that's one of the reasons it's obviously so successful for you and for everyone. So from the three of us, or the four of us, Bridge, as well, thank you so much. That has been a wonderful, wonderful hour, and I cannot thank you enough.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm just trying to share the best of what I've come across so far, and I hope that you and the listeners find it useful. And I appreciate the chance to talk with you all today and share some of your precious time. So thanks again.
So the book will not be hard to find, Atomic Habits. We do a lot of travel with our podcast. We do a live show, and with that, a lot of going past bookshops at the airport, and it's always in the top.
Yep.
It has been since I've been touring. Basically, it's always in the top three there. Atomic Habits, the newsletter is 321. And as well as the book and as well as the newsletter, you have an app as well now, which is based about all the stuff you've just spoken about.
Yeah, that's right. We I've learned a lot since the book has come out 5 years ago, and we've taken the principles that have been most useful and practical and actionable for readers and translated them into a habit tracking app. It's probably the number one thing that my audience has asked for is, can I get some kind of habits app? And so it's called Atoms, and it's all about bite-sized bits of knowledge that will help you build good habits and break bad ones. And then it also has a series of strategies and habit trackers and other things that will help you stick to habits more consistently. And I'm very excited to share it.
I thought you said atoms. I couldn't work out the link between atoms, but atoms. Yeah, okay, atoms.
Atoms.
The app is called Atoms.
And I understand, James, that unlike other apps, you can only download 1 megabyte at a time each day. So each day you only download 1 megabyte at a time. Yeah.
It will slowly accumulate on your phone.
Yeah.
You'll be able to open in 1 year.
Just have to remember, get into the habit of downloading the app. Yep, great idea.
Okay, so that is not the case for anyone who's confused right now. You can get it straight away.
Yeah.
It's called Atoms. Congratulations on all that you do, and thank you so much for joining us on the Imperfects.